Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 38 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin. That's Kevin.
No, I'm not Kevin.
I think you did this one already, man.
I'm Jim Morrison,
Why are you Jim Morrison?
lead singer of the band The Doors.
That's right, folks. This is a terrible way to introduce the concept that this episode is all about doors. We did chapters 2 and 3. We started up chapter 4 a little bit to get the characters from that, which unlocked a number of doors that we could do, past from the one door we already talked about, which was Tita. So in order to have a good discussion, we decided to markate those out and have an episode dedicated to them.
We have 5 doors to talk about today. We got one sun door, and the rest are star doors. So,
Yes.
to give a brief recap, there's 25 doors, memory fragments, in the game. 5 moon that are quite long, story-centric. The part 1 of Tita's took, what, an hour at least, Colin?
It took an hour. I mean, granted, we were on stream, but it took an hour. And the other ones that are there are also very, very long.
We have 15 star doors, and everyone keeps talking about star door 15, and it's gotten to the point where I think we're going to do it together on stream, Colin.
Yeah, well, no. Look, Kevin, your face is so expressive that I need your face on stream for that.
I'm just saying, this better live up to all the hype.
I hear you.
And then we have 5 sun doors, short mini games, and boy, the first sun door that we got sucked, but it lived up to the hype of the character.
But I have to say, we found out on stream that if you do nothing, it's still fine. So why don't you remind us what sun door number 1 is? Because it involves your favorite character.
Sun Door 1, it's a minigame with Josette, the Capua delivery service. It's memory fragments. We've talked about this in brief on stream and in the podcast. They're a great way. Let us know who these people are outside Joshua and Estelle, and then also outside Kevin, the main characters of the games. Get some new insights or glimpses. And that was not true here. We did not get any, I think, insight or interiority or change on Josette. She sucks.
I mean, hold on, whoa, hold up. Because we learned a lot about the Capua family's backstory in this door.
What did we learn? We knew they were nobles.
Okay, but that doesn't mean we didn't learn something. We knew that they were a rich family in Erebonia that lost the house. What we did not know was how that happened. We learned that Don had been hoodwinked by a contractor. We also then learned the fate of the Capua family after SC, which is a pardon and a loan from the Queen so that they can start up a delivery service. Basically, they're trying to go straight, so good for them. And then also this door kind of explains why Gilbert is in Grand Cell in the beginning of Trails of the Sky the Third.
1, I don't give a fuck on any of the Capua delivery service, the Capua family, their backstory, the evils of subcontractors, or Gilbert. And 2, this delivery service is logistically, it's not going to make any money. Let me tell you why, Colin. Okay, so travel by sea is the most cost-effective, and that's true today. Next is by rail.
Have you looked at a map of Zemuria?
Yeah, so next is rail, then trucks, then air, because travel by air is so, per mile, is so expensive. Per mile, per pound.
Question for you. Hold on, question for you. Have you ever seen a train, or a car in Liberl?
No, and they are backwards. Air travel is expensive. Air movement is expensive. So the use of airships to go, an hour, 2-hour flights is so economically ineffective, it's no wonder why they're all inbred farmer hicks.
Wow, okay, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, number 1... Hold on, no. I know you're going to
We need density and dense housing, Colin.
Number 1, Liberl is not a country of inbred hicks. This is not, take your pick of stereotypical states of the southern United States. Number 2, You are applying rates from commercial aircraft in the modern world, and yet we know that airplanes like airships in this world are powered by orbital power. They're distinctly not powered by gas. So you have no fucking idea how expensive these things are.
Is there no energy cost associated with travel then? Is it a perpetual motion machine?
We don't know. I do not know the fuel economy of Liberalian airships. I do know that Liberal specializes in the creation of airships, and if there was ever an ability to make it efficient, they would. Plus, it's not like this small cruiser is going to take the same amount of fuel as a Boeing whatever the fuck or a JetBlue ship. It's small, it's lightweight, it's targeted. And
Colin?
I hold on, and I want to push back on this claim that it's not going to make money because we have, by ascertaining the fact that Liberal, it does not have rail, Liberal does not have any trucks, they basically have no roads, and sea travel I don't think will let them ship to Crossbell or to Calvert, and it's going to be very circuitous to get around the entirety of the continent. That's not efficient either. Air travel is the only way to connect Liberal with the rest of the continent's economy.
This is my response.
Okay, so for those who cannot watch, which is literally everybody, he is saying wow wow nanny nanny poo poo through an image that he can't even send via chat. Instead, he has shared a screenshot of this image in a web browser that only I can see.
It's the Always Sunny Charlie crying meme. That's my response to this. Air travel, you cannot make airships big enough to house the necessary movement of people and goods compared to train and truck. Think of how big a train is, what it can carry, and how quickly it can carry a lot of stuff. How many airships the size of the Capital Bobcat would you need? Hundreds.
Oh, clearly the capacity is lower, but again, rail is not going to work in this situation because Liberal has no railroads.
And that's on them. They're a small, densely populated country. They should have high efficiency public transportation on rail more than airships.
Or they already have efficient transportation called a fucking airship.
Rail can get you more people with fewer support staff. It's more efficient.
And, okay, let's move on from this argument and let's talk about the actual minigame. Or rather, you can tell us about the minigame because when I tried to play it on stream for the first half, I got a black screen and I could not see any of the ships coming at me, but we also learned that they don't deal enough damage to you so you can get past the first phase without doing anything.
It's a standard turret minigame. You have enemies coming, shoot them down, and that's it.
Now, I will say, when I did this the first time, way back in the day, I had a controller and I only used the controller, and it sucked on a controller. But you used mouse and keyboard for this, and so did I.
Then we have Gilbert come in. Here's the quote, boss, end quote. On a mission from the society, you shoot him down and he crashes. And we've talked about this a bit. We'll talk about it again. He's becoming so much of a caricature. He's not threatening. He's pathetic and he kind of diminishes. He makes less serious, unserious any scene he's in. There can be no gravitas, no emotional depth because he is what he is.
He's comic relief. I think that you're asking for him to be somebody that he's not. He's meant to be laughed at.
But in the first game, he was not just comic relief. It's the pronunciation of one or a few items about him, traits about him, to the exclusion or diminishment of others.
By the time that we get to SC, he's basically entirely comic relief. And then this is just compounded in Trails in the Sky the Third. But I want to talk about that boss fight because I disagree with you that it's completely bad. And you say just shoot him down. But there are some strategic things that you have to do. This fight did work for me. I could play that. And I have some complaints about its design as well, but I don't think it was the worst thing in the world. Essentially, the strategy comes down to you take shots at him when you can, but you have to preserve how long you do it, because if you do it too long, then you're only doing pot shots. And the entire time, he is casting out missiles that you have to find and shoot before they hit you. This means that there's multiple targets you have to hit all of the time, and you have to find the best moments to actually strike him. I think that that's interesting. The part that is bad about it is that he has no health bar, so you really have no indication as to how well you're doing. But I think with that fix, it would have been perfectly fine.
Perfectly adequate. What an endorsement.
I mean, look, JRPGs are not known for engaging minigames. On stream, Porkbot brought up the example of Final Fantasy VII, and he's right. Final Fantasy VII is a fantastic game. Its minigames suck. The snowboarding minigame is one of the worst things I've ever played. This, compared to the snowboarding minigame, or Chocobo Racing in Final Fantasy VII, it's like a AAA game compared to those. Chocobo Racing, I might be exaggerating about, but snowboarding can go fuck itself.
Okay. I don't know what to say to that.
I don't know what to say to that.
You know what you can say, Colin?
What can I say? I can't say pale according to the Automod.
No, you cannot. We learned yesterday that the Automod chat filter does not like the word pale.
Okay, so we have a listener on Twitch. He's probably, I think, our most loyal viewer, and he's very active in chat. And he goes out of his way to find ways to trigger the Automod. Imagine our surprise when the word pale triggers the Automod.
And folks, that makes it difficult to talk about the next Star Door that we did, which is The Salt Pale. Not the critically acclaimed web novel by Wildbow, but what is a really great piece of world building, I thought, for the continent of Zemuria and for the antagonist of the first two games, whether hidden or out in the open, Weissman.
I agree, and we should talk about it. But first, I do want to just note how incredible and amazing it is that somehow, through the very few people that listen to this podcast, it is growing, don't get me wrong, but still, you've managed to find another person who knows what the web novel Pale is. Talk about a niche on top of a niche.
It's not niche, Colin, but you know what is niche? The number of surviving Ambrians.
So why don't you tell us a bit about the Salt Pale disaster in Northumbria?
So what's the framing device? How are we learning about it? It's a classified report that Reese composed. And it makes you wonder, why did she write this when she did, whenever she did? What was so important, so pressing they needed a dossier at the moment? That's something to keep in mind.
Well, I mean, I think that the disaster itself is pretty obvious as to why they need to take a record of it.
Yes, but that was 25 or so years prior to the start of the game, and can only be a very few years before the start of the game when Reese wrote it. At most, it's what, 22 years?
That's a good point. Reese wouldn't have been alive.
Why now? I'm not sure.
I have a hypothetical, I have a speculation, but we'll get to it at the end.
A pillar of salt one day appeared right outside the capital of Northumbria, a principality. And it was the bishop that alerted the church, and they sent a team in on Merkaba chariot. There's a lot of biblical allusions going on. The pillar of salt, Sodom and Gomorrah. Merkaba or Merkava, that's the Hebrew for chariot, and it's also their word for tank, or a class of tanks in the IDF. So we have chariots going to the pillar of salt. And it turned a wide swathe of the country into salt, and much of the rest solidified the agriculture fields. They're starving. They cannot subsist on their own resources. And Colin, I want to highlight that. I think it's a great way of second order consequences. This supernatural, it seems, event happened. How did it impact day-to-day lives, say farming? And the game explores that.
It also explores the political consequences, right? King Balmund fleece. Which honestly, look, I gotta say, if I was a king of someplace and my entire country was turning to salt, even if, like, yes, you should, like, stay with your country during a disaster, right? Vladimir Zelensky very famously did this to great effect. But if everything's turning to salt, including maybe you, as a ruler, I would want to remove myself from that situation so that I could help lead recovery efforts not being made into salt. So I kind of sympathize with the man there, but his absence pissed off people so much that they overthrew him and created a constitutional democracy. But because they have no natural resources, they did what you tend to do: form into war bands and fight other people's wars. Think of the city states in northern Italy during the early modern period.
They had a much more functioning economies than this. I'm not sure what, say, cash flow is coming in
Yeah,
aside from the mercenary bands. And we are told that a lot of the Jaeger Corps were formed by this. So let's look into the tertiary
yeah.
considerations here. They get hard currency that's valuable, and you know what else, Colin, they're doing? They're sending away mouths to have other people feed them. And I
What?
think that's not unimportant. They're taking the risk of endemic starvation and turning it into only mass hunger.
Sure, that's a good point. It's a way to manage scant resources by sending away consumers. What it also does, maybe a courtier effect, is that it fundamentally changes warfare on the continent by making these Jaeger Corps available as weapons of war.
Deniable, disposable weapons of war, too.
Yeah,
Look at the massacre in Hamilton. There was no issue at all about disposing of the inconvenient bands. Because why not? They're not Erebonian citizens. They're not integrated into the Erebonian armed forces. They're a tool to be used and thrown away when done.
in a way, made it even a scapegoat. Right? You can blame
Yes,
this terrible decision on them, even when it actually comes from the upper brass.
and this is pure speculation, but you know what I would be not at all surprised by?
What?
I bet initial huge outlay of public sympathy, but now I bet a lot of people do not like Northumbria because of the Jaeger Corps. I bet they have a bad reputation as murderers, thugs, criminals. What say you? And people are like, yeah, maybe they had it coming, retrojecting the consequences of the event as a moral culpability.
Sure. I haven't seen, in playing through the series, I haven't seen much people talk about how they feel about Northumbrians. But certainly, we see discussions about how people feel about Jaegers. And we have to remember, Jaegers are illegal in Liberl, right? That's indicating to you, like, whoa, they have a bad reputation. But the other thing that I'm thinking about now is that not only does it change the face of warfare in Zemuria, it also allows rich private individuals better access to violence because they are able to convert their cash flow into armed power in a way that would not be as easy to do if mercenary bands weren't just waiting around waiting to be hired, right? They'd have to be part of the state apparatus if they wanted to have a militia or an army.
Now they can destabilize one of the essential purposes of the state, the monopoly on coercion and violence.
Right. But that's not the only thing that was dropped in this door, although just the fact that we're looking at this country and we can think through all the ramifications that has, not just for Northumbria, but for the entirety of Zemuria. We also see how the church deals with this problem. And the way that they deal with this problem is, I mean, they wait for it to get to a point where they can physically actually do anything, because during its rampage, if anybody got close enough to it, they'd be turned into salt, which doesn't help anybody. But it got to a small little thing, and they managed to use something they called Gleitnir. We're not really sure of its nature, but it seems to be a way to encase the salt pail into a box. The report says that the salt pail is not an artifact. It has artifact-like power, but is not an artifact, which I found very interesting. But you know, an organization has multiple ways to deal with something like this. They could block it away forever. They could seek to understand its nature so that they know how to deal with it if something like this happens again. Or they can do what the Congregation of the Sacraments decided to do and figure out how to weaponize it.
It's really interesting how within the structure of the Church of Idios, we see the positive in the humble priest and the good connotations of this organized religion. but we don't get a sense of like the martyr or the one who like sacrifices for the good of all. I'm not sure how to quite frame it, but this feels like the church militant is dominant within the institution of the ecclesiastical hierarchy. The Templars, the people who hunt heretics. That might just be the only exposure we've had is this more militant faction, but they seem, I don't know. Go on.
I mean, it makes sense, right? Because these are RPGs fundamentally have some action to them. A militaristic wing does stuff. Ascetic monks don't really do anything. But we also haven't heard them talking about monks or monasteries.
Or just, martyrdom, or like the veneration of the poor, the least among you. You know what I'm gesturing at?
I mean, the absence of martyrdom is fascinating to me because it does not appear as if the Church of Idios has constructed its identity around the idea of being a persecuted
No.
community the way that Christians have throughout the entirety of their history. I mean, going all the way back to late antiquity. It's one of the things that I study is how they do that with martyr narratives, and it's fascinating stuff. And given that this church is so closely tied to ideas of the medieval church, this absence is fascinating.
They know they're on top. They don't hide it. They kind of glory in it.
I mean, they don't even question it. Right there, we don't see anything else that it's competing against.
And again, the whole why is it the Church of Idios? Why not just the church? No suffix, no prefix. And this leads me into what created this. I have a prediction, Colin, official. Mark it.
I've marked it. What's your official prediction?
It's artifact-like, but not an artifact, created by an equal and opposite force, created by an entity to challenge Idios, created by what's an entity that we've seen that can make itself felt in the mundane and the metaphysical, the phantasmic. Okay, I can't make a connection. I think the Phantasma, Lord of Phantasma, is somehow involved in this. And this is fixed, Colin. This is my declaration.
Okay. Then I want to interrogate this a bit because you're not just making speculation about the origin of the Salt Pail. You're fundamentally trying to fit both Phantasma and the world of Zemuria as a whole into a Manichaean worldview. I'm curious, what do you think because we've seen devils, right? So clearly there is some sort of opposition to Idios. There is a distinction between heaven and hell. That is a fact. We cannot deny this. But when you call the opposing force comparable, do you imagine it to be a complete yin and yang, neither are stronger than the other? Or are you imagining this as Idios is still dominant and we have like a Satan situation? Like, what are you thinking?
I imagine a Luciferian, at most, type situation. As in, can contend, but either whether it's spoken, prophesied, or understood or revealed, Idios will win in the end. I do not think it's a true Manichaean of equality.
Gotcha. So it's not going to be like Idios versus Dark Idios. You're saying more like God versus Satan. And then the last thing that we learned about this is that Weissman, I kept telling you things about Weissman, about how he'd been part of the church and that he turned into an apostate. And I said, watch out for Trails in the Sky the Third. Always something in Trails the Third. And this is what I was talking about with that. He was a victim of this Salt Pail incident. He was taken in by the church. He rises through the ranks pretty quickly. He becomes a bishop within 10 years, which, I mean, we don't know the standard for becoming a bishop in the Church of Idios, but in the Catholic Church, 10 years is really fucking quick. So that's what I'm guessing. And then he manages to get himself excommunicated in 5 years.
It makes you wonder, was it connected? Was his decision to join the church connected to the Salt Pail? Did he seek to know why?
Well, if we think back to, like, he clearly lived through this, right? He lived through and saw the destruction of his homeland. And then we see him talking at the end of SC about humanity being cursed, selfish, needing some sort of destruction to bring about renewal, to remind people how terrible people are. I mean, I think it's worth asking the question if his trauma with the salt pail led him to those beliefs.
And I think trauma is a really good way of phrasing it. It's a traumatic response. He's seen the worst that can befall a society, the disintegration of his nation, the transformation of his culture, and he's trying to process it. I wonder if he sought forbidden knowledge to understand what happened or try to reverse. It's no grounds, but I wouldn't be surprised. But a lot hinges on when did he join the society and why? What was the hook? There's always a hook. We saw in the Louvre comic.
Right, we saw with the Louvre comic that Louvre had gone through a tragedy and then Campanella knew about it and brought him in. So maybe something like this did happen with Weissman. A thought just occurred to me too. I mean, he's talking about he's talking about people who are getting too comfortable that they don't exert any effort to help other people or to solve problems, which ultimately led to the fall of the Liber arc. If we think about the little that we know about the Salt Pail, you know what I don't think we really heard about is foreign aid. I mean, this country is so destroyed that most of its male population become professional soldiers. Have you seen any mention of Erebonia sending food supplies? Or Calvert or Liberal? In the real world, that's what you would do, at least for a small portion of time.
We haven't. And we know that some sort of political annexation took place because it was the principality. Now it's the state. I think it was taken over by...
But I think the state, that refers to the abolishment of the royal family, and then they become a state.
It's not anarchy, but I don't think the central government has much power beyond the walls of the decrepit capital they're in.
Probably not, no.
And so I can see a lot of resentment at the established institutions, the powers that be. And I want to touch back on the society. What they do is they go to people with trauma and they have a hook, a way to not answer or process or internalize the trauma in a healthy way, but some means of maybe revenge is the right word. We start with Ren. It's a way to they sink their claws while seemingly immersing you deeper into the trauma through a facade of answering it, if that makes any sense.
Definitely. They see this darkness and they offer you an answer to it.
A false light, a false dawn that makes you further recede into the depths. And I would not be surprised if something happened with Weissman along those lines.
It could be. The final thing that I think that's interesting about this, though, is that in the confidential report, it talks about deploying the salt pail bullets or bolts. And it seems like Weissman's the first person they're trying it out on. And it is an unequivocal success.
One, it's kind of awfully funny and funnily awful. He was killed by the ruin of his homeland.
Yeah, he was killed by the thing that killed his homeland. And you know what? I bet you Kevin knew, and Kevin did not care.
There was so much from Chapter 4, that conversation between Joshua and Kevin that we will get into in the episode, but Kevin Graham is cold.
He's a cold motherfucker.
But, also the church is this is a weapon to kill the heretics. They expect to use this multiple times.
Right. I mean, they're definitely seeing heretics as a threat to be expunged. Which is interesting because it's not like they're saying this other church needs to be expunged or this other religious group. It's still Idios being the totality of religion, but it seemed to me that the way that they were defining heretics were those that were quote unquote interested in the sacraments. And here sacraments has to mean something like artifacts, because normally we use the word sacrament to mean like the sacrament of communion or the sacrament of marriage or of holy orders. That doesn't make you a heretic. That makes you a practicing Catholic.
Forbidden knowledge, and it's always heretic or apostate, never infidel, which is a non-general term. Infidel does have some specific meaning to it.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. And it feels important and non-accidental on purpose. And it just sucks. It tore so many families apart, fathers and sons. But also, Colin, it tore apart lovers.
And we have to talk a little bit about lovers, don't we? Once we get to a dinner party.
Okay, so Societal destruction, cultural transformation, almost cultural genocide, to be honest. And, boy, I've never seen a more hoist by your own petard than Weissman getting killed by the salt pillar. Now for teenage love and drama.
That's right. We're talking about the next star door, which is the Banquet. It's really an exploration of the events that happen like right after Trails in the Sky SC. We're at a dinner party celebrating the fall of the Libra arc. And we get to see Chloe operating in her environment as a royal. And we get to control Joshua. Joshua is going around talking to a lot of the people that we have met on our journey in those past 2 games.
And we talk to some familiar faces. Party members, mayors, almost everyone of consequence.
Except Gilbert.
Just gonna move on from that. One of the things I liked was Cassius talking about the process of rebuilding the country, of reconstruction. It's long, difficult, unglamorous. It involves supply chains, logistics, and it's gonna take a while. I liked how it's not the everything's better magic. It's a process.
And I think wasn't that like your main complaint about that chapter, where it kind of seemed like everything was fixed pretty quickly? But this is going ahead and saying like, no, this is taking a long time.
My complaint about the chapter was it was too short in interval. I would have liked a month from the disruption of the orbital network. Not like a day or two, however long it was.
But, so yeah, there was that cool scene with Cassius. The main attraction, though, here, pun intended, is the conversation between Chloe and Joshua. Now, we already know from SC, right? Chloe talks to Estelle and confesses the fact that she had developed a crush on Joshua, but recognized that Estelle won that fight and that Joshua was not going to have the hots for her. Joshua had eyes only for Estelle, and she was cool with it.
She said, "I love you, Joshua." And he's like, "One, I'm happy you feel that way, but..." And then Chloe makes certain that she's not trying to break anyone up. It was for her closure. She wanted this for herself, which is mature.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to let those feelings bottle up. I was kind of surprised that it jumped to "I love you," but they have gone through quite a lot of things together, and so it makes sense in that one. I have to say, and I think people on the stream got a kick out of this, I had a false memory about this door. I was convinced that during this door, Joshua and Chloe kissed. And Chloe then used that as like, oh, well, that's enough. You know, I just needed that one thing. Now I can move on. That did not happen. So I was all ready to be mad at Joshua for that scene. I'm mad at him for a different reason. I'll get to that in a minute. But no, Joshua did not do that. He was loyal to Estelle the whole way through. So props to him.
Now, your dislike of Joshua was founded on entirely mythical grounds. But there was one reason to kind of be annoyed at him.
There was. So now, granted, we know the fact that Joshua and Estelle stayed together and that they're traveling Erebonia together because we saw that at the end of SC. And this scene is happening before that final post-credit scene. However, you go around, you talk to everybody, you run into Olivier and Shara. And Joshua explicitly promises to never run away from Estelle again. And to, be with her and to handle things as a couple and all of this. And then the very next person he talks to is Chloe, where he reveals his plan to leave Estelle and go to Erebonia. And I know that you might be able to say, well, people are complicated, sometimes you are confused. No, fuck that shit. He said one thing, and then he immediately said another thing after he had supposedly already learned his lesson. And I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of sympathy for that.
Contrary-wise to our positions ended the first game, I thought it was good.
What the fuck? I understood Joshua. You hated Joshua at the end of FC. Now you're like, oh, well, now I understand.
He had singular moments of epiphany. Often in fiction lead to the breaking of toxic, harmful, ingrained patterns of behavior. And you're good from here on out. That's not what happened here. It's a long struggle of maybe relapsing a tiny bit. Trying to do better, to be different. And we see that here. He did relapse.
But he's not trying to be better if he's doing the exact same fucking thing.
He relapsed, but he was able to be convinced without that much persuasion. And we know...
after he already promised he wouldn't do it. It'd be one thing if he didn't.
And he was able to, he took the criticism, took the advice.
Yeah, it took Chloe to remind him to not be an asshole.
And changed, and was better. And we know from the post-credit scene that follows this from SC, Estelle is with him as they travel the continent. That stuck. He changed a major pattern of behavior.
Look, I would agree with you if there was like something that he was grappling with. And I guess he is grappling with this decision, but if he hadn't told Shara that he understand that what he did was wrong and that he was not going to do it again, because then he immediately goes and tries to do it. We don't see any real room for him to be struggling with it or for him to be grappling with it. It goes from 0 to 100. It's a complete flip-flop where he recognizes what he did was wrong, promises to never do it again, and then says he's going to do it again. That's not realistic. And if it is, then people are worse than I give them credit for.
No, it's not that. It's, I don't know how to do it. He relapsed, yes, like I said, and he stopped. He went on the right course.
But it's not like he relapsed into drugs where he knows that heroin is bad, but then he's offered heroin in an alleyway and he remembers how good it is and therefore goes into that. I mean, I guess you could say that he's relapsing into old defense mechanisms to protect the woman that he loves, but he just said that he understands why that is wrong. And there's no like physical addiction to bad decisions.
Yeah, he knows what he's doing is wrong. It's why he knows what he's doing is wrong. It's why he's being so sneaky about it. If he thought it was right, he wouldn't be hiding like a thief in the night.
I'm just saying the man needs to stop being a douchebag and to just treat Estelle right. Estelle deserves better than that.
I agree. She deserves a lot.
So one thing that we didn't talk about is how throughout this entire scene, Estelle and Josette are like fighting. And it's kind of funny how while Estelle is fighting with Josette, mostly because of feelings of rivalry with Joshua, you have a fucking princess over here confessing her love to her man. And she has no idea that that's happened. But this brings up an essential question, and it's one that I want you to consider very seriously. If Estelle was going to be part of a throuple with Joshua, who would be the better, Josette or Chloe?
Colin, how is this any kind of question? Chloe literally says, I really love both you and Estelle.
Exactly. That's why I think that she should be invited in.
Like, it's not, I mean, we know her love for Joshua is not, it's neither platonic nor familial. And I love you and Estelle. I mean, I know. And speaking of being happy, is Julia Schwartz happy with her lot in life? Protecting Chloe?
So I have a hot take that I think you're going to disagree with, because you're going to say no, but I'm going to say yes.
Oh, I'm going to say that she's searching for something beyond satisfaction and finds the path to it in this memory fragment.
Well, you're going to have to expound upon that, because I just did the whole thing yesterday, and I don't see where you're coming from with that at all.
To me, a lot of the Julia's day off is she's ordered to go relax for a day by the queen herself. I see a lot of it is she's satisfied and content with her lot in life, with her position as head of the guard for Chloe. But what more is there beyond that, beyond this day-to-day routine?
But it doesn't seem like she's particularly concerned with not having that. Her core struggle is not, oh, I guess I should have a life outside of my work. Her core struggle is that her country is calling her to serve a higher office due to her fulfillment of her duties during the war, but accepting would take her away from the person that she cherishes the most as a sister and as a charge, being Chloe. And so she has to find a way to rationalize how she can leave Chloe to take on these new responsibilities that the queen would like her to have. She's divided between two separate sets of feelings of duty.
There is more of a personal connection for her duty with and to Chloe.
Oh, absolutely. And I think at the end of this scene, it's a really nice confirmation of it, that she is able to move on, accept her promotion, but she still keeps this connection with Chloe. You know, they affirm to themselves that they're important to each other as people, not just as jobs. And they do this by having a lovely little tea party scene.
And that raises, what is their relationship, so to speak?
I mean, there's really no question there. Julia straight up says, I'm like a big sister to you.
And we see this a lot in the Kaseki series. The sibling, but especially the familial sister, Estelle and Tita, and a lot last game, Estelle, conversely, with Shira, how Estelle could be vulnerable, could seek reassurance from someone who she saw as a sister figure. And now Chloe and Julia.
I mean, it seems like a big theme in Kiseki is that your friends are the family that you choose. And in a sense, maybe even your real family.
Estelle and Ven, last game also.
I don't think there's a whole lot to talk about with this one, to be honest. Like, it's an interesting look into Julia, but at the end of the day, there's not much to, like, really discuss or debate.
No, and that's fine.
So let's end it with the door that's called Journey's End. This is Zin's star door, where he's about to leave home, or he's about to leave for home, he's about to head back to Calvard, when all of a sudden Kilika wants to go to the hot springs with him. Ooh la la. And so it seems as if Zin finds both Ambassador Cochrane and Kilika to be attractive women, which I guess suppose canonically that they are. And so this leads into some funny situations in the beginning where like, ooh, you're taking me to a hot spring. What cha 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 cha. But really, the meat of this scene is the fact that the government in Calvard, President Rocksmith, wants to establish an extra-parliamentary intelligence division that he's calling the Rocksmith Agency, I believe. And Ambassador Cochrane would like Kilika to lead it because of her demonstrated organizational prowess with her work in the Bracers Guild. What did you think about this scene, Kevin?
Well, my initial reaction was this is presented as like good or at least neutral. Extra parliamentary operations not having oversight. Like, what let me say, the fuck? And I thought it gets the last thing that we need, I'm quoting here, is an organization like this suffering from Parliament's failures to make prompt decisions or general ineptitude. And there's a huge anti-politician theme running through games, especially RPGs. Huge in Mass Effect series and especially Mass Effect 3, where the council, the government, the obstacles to the strongman, shepherd, the bracers, whatever, that can take decisive right action without getting approval or forms stamped or whatever would be great. No delay, no bureaucratic obstruction. See Richard Comma Allen in FC. And like, I get why it's more exciting to go shoot and beat stuff up than Bureaucracy Task Force Simulator 2001, but I don't know.
I mean, I hear what you're saying. There definitely is an anti-politician bent in the genre in particular. But when it comes to this thing specifically, I kind of feel like they're right. Could you imagine if every operation the CIA underwent was subject to not just congressional oversight, but congressional votes with how divided our Congress is right now?
Well, my impression was it wouldn't be like that much degree, but more general oversight capabilities the same way, similar to what Congress does for...
No. They explicitly say this is under the president's control, not Parliament's. And that would indicate that Parliament has control of it, that determines what operations that they do. Now, the form that can take a lot of different forms. Maybe there would be an intelligence committee that would make most of the decisions. But the overall presentation of it is that Parliament would be in control, which means Parliament will have to vote.
Maybe.
Now, if there is no oversight at all, we can both agree that this is not good either. You do need some oversight. I don't know if we know that much about Calvard's real separation of powers, separate but equal powers versus just having them separate, which is a whole other can of worms. But I don't know. I do kind of feel like something as institutionalized and important to national security as intelligence gathering should be constituted in the executive branch and not in the legislative branch.
Fair. But it's so rife for abuse and the like. I mean, what about a special intelligence committee of a more smaller, manageable size that does more direct oversight and exercises control?
I mean, yeah, maybe you want some kind of a committee, but I don't know. I still feel like we don't know enough about that particular thing. And we can, look, if there's no oversight, I agree that it's an overreach. But I agree with the fundamental decision to not put it under Parliament's control. My question for you is, okay, we've seen Kilika. We've seen how skilled she is. There's no doubt about this. However, she is also working for a third party and has not lived in Calvard for many years. Do you buy this explanation for why Rocksmith wants Kilika specifically?
No, it is weird. You would think she would be a bit of a security risk to put in command and control over your spy agency. Yes?
Like, on the one hand, her working for the Bracer Guild would give her the opportunity to learn a lot about the continent of Zemuria and form connections all across the continent, which would be helpful in her role as spy chief. On the other hand, I don't know. I mean, she has left the country, and obviously just leaving your country doesn't make you disloyal or anything like that, but it does make you wonder if Rocksmith requested her specifically. How does he even know her?
To be the head of the first spy agency, and she's working for a multinational law enforcement group, essentially, that often, from what we see in Liberal, has disputes with sovereign bodies.
That's a weird thing, because Bracer law is that you do not interfere with sovereignty. You're not supposed to get embroiled in internal politics. The stuff...
We see why some people in the state distrust them still.
Yeah, I mean, we see Morgan distrusting him, for instance. We see... And obviously the stuff with Richard is like a big deal. But we know nothing. I know stuff because I played Kuro, but at this point we know nothing about the Calvardian government's relationship with the Bracer Guild.
Yeah, could be good. Could be good.
Let's end with talking about this quote. Zin and Kilika have this conversation about how Kilika thinks that she's been running away from her father's path in life, the Living Fist, because she wanted to see if she could live that out in a non-violent way. And Zin's like, no, actually, you're the brave one here. We are the cowards. But he has this quote. The nature of humanity means that as long as we exist, conflict will never cease. Instead, what's important is not blindly preaching idealism, but preaching ideals while keeping a firm eye on the reality of how to quell conflict. What do you think about that quote, Kev?
I think it's a great quote. It's not naive in any ways, and it really strikes at the heart of a huge moral quandary. If you desire peace, if you're a pacifist, or maybe someone who's not quite that far, how do you do it? How do you have peace in a world with conflict? Like Zen says, when people are prone to conflict. And essentially, how do you enforce peace on those who do not want peace? By being better at force than they are. More prepared, even, to use it. Non-violent, non-permanent, maybe, but still. There's some gentle souls out there. They encourage peace as gently as possible, and more power to them. And we need them. And some people think it's better to insist upon peace no more gently than is necessary. And Zen is in this camp to a T.
Yeah, I have to say that I did not think about it in these terms. I mean, I see where you're coming from, the whole if one desires peace, prepare for war adage. And there's a certain logic to that. I was thinking more about like a domestic politics side, where by simply blindly preaching idealism, another way to characterize that is being a loud extremist with no sense of nuance. And typically, when we talk about this conflict between either extremism or centrism or idealism versus realism, we get lost in a either realpolitik, actually get something done, or ideal, this is what needs to get done, and that's what we have to do. And what Zin's quote does is allow you to bridge the gap there, which is do what actually can get done while keeping ideals in mind. So to me, quelling a conflict was more in the sense of like a legislative domestic conflict, but certainly could also refer to any type of international armed conflict or something like that.
Yeah, it's you live in the world that is, and you try to create the world that you want. And that may mean doing some things you'd rather not for your ideals.
Well, with that, Kevin, do you have anything else you want to talk about in terms of this door? Or in terms of the doors in general?
I think overall, these doors have been very good.
I really like this facet of Trails of the Sky the Third. I think it's a really interesting way to give these characters just that extra bit of depth, that extra bit of characterization.
And it's them outside of their relationship with Joshua, with Estelle, with Kevin Graham. I mean, for the most part. For the most part. Chloe's...
I mean, yeah, they're still there sometimes, but Chloe's thing was about Chloe and Josh, or Joshua. If, it was like normal, Estelle would be part of that the entire time. But what was important was Chloe versus Joshua. Or, as what I remarked on the stream, perhaps we should be calling her Close, because that's what the Japanese is, and that's what the OVA says. And we gave the OVA shit for calling her Close, but it turns out they were stricter to the truth.
I refuse to give the OVA any credit whatsoever, Colin. And I think that's a good place to end on, an uncompromising position.
I am looking for a way to quell this conflict while preaching my ideal.
Insist upon peace, Colin, as firmly as you may. And until you do that, and even beyond, I'm Kevin, that's Colin. See you next time.